The hour of 7:30 has arrived and actually passed us. We're 5 minutes late getting started this evening. Apologize for that. I'd like to call to order this business meeting of District 116 for February 20th, 2018. Roll call, please.
Member Carter.
Here.
Member Hall.
Here.
Member Patton.
Here.
Member Pulaski.
Here.
Member Fisher is here. Vice President Rollins
Here.
Gray, and President Demmett.
Here, and it's good to be back. Any additions, corrections, or modifications to this evening's agenda?
No, there are not.
Citizen statements. This evening, if there are any citizen statements, please turn in a goldenrod sheet to our recording secretary. Lori is recording secretary tonight. She's also running the cameras for us, so it's a busy evening for Lori. So we do have one individual that wishes to address the board tonight, and that's Jennifer Straub. So Jennifer, if you would come to the table, and if someone would make sure the mic is turned on for her.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the work that you do. I'm Jennifer Straub. I'm the local group lead for an organization called Moms Demand Action for Gun Violence in America, I'm sorry, I'm nervous. I'm the local group lead for an organization called Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. We have the primary goal of ending gun violence. I'm a parent of children in Urbana schools and a former educator, so I know how important the work that you do is. In our country, we're seeing a steady increase in school shootings, and yet we're sending our students to school every day with the idea that it's the best place for them to be, hoping that they are going to continue to achieve great things. We send our teachers into work every day knowing that they have a plan for how to live and how to protect their students, and demanding that they constantly consider whether they would rather protect my children or go home to theirs, and that is problematic. This week we have seen an unprecedented number of young people come forward and take ownership of this problem and say, enough's enough, we demand that there are better solutions than teaching us how to duck and cover. We will not be targets in this any longer without change. What I would like to see from you as leaders in our educational community is support in that as our students come forward and demand this change, that you support those marches, those walkouts, those calls to action. I know that this is a priority for all of you who have made education in our community a priority in your lives, and I'm excited to see what happens with our young people. Thank you.
Thank you. We do not have a call for an exec session after tonight's meeting, so a motion to approve the agenda would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion's carried. There are no commendations or recognitions tonight, but we do have a couple of administrative reports. So we'll begin with the RFP for the UMS UHS Site Plan 2018.
Right.
Don?
So the RFP that I handed out last time, we just kind of started initial discussions on. I wanted to find out if any of the board members had any further thoughts about this in terms of wording, direction. Are you comfortable with it?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with what you shared last time. I think we had a good discussion about just clarifying in my mind what the intent was.
Laura, do you have copies of it? Didn't go out apparently in this packet. I'm sorry, it went out with the last board packet.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll have Lori get the copies.
Yeah.
Yep. We were missing a couple.
Any board comments?
I didn't have any issues with the wording.
I appreciate, sorry,
No,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say, I appreciated everything being broken down the way that you and Matt had done for everyone, so we could really clearly understand the direction that we need to go forward with. So, thank you.
Our goal was to capture what was presented by the Facilities Planning Committee and their recommendation, but also to leave it open-ended enough so that stakeholder engagement and feedback could be a major piece of the work that the consultant does moving forward.
I guess the only other, excuse me, the only other question I wanted to ask, I don't remember you sharing this last time, is, you know, you were hoping that maybe the RFP might go out in a month's time, and that we would have decisions made before the end of the school year. Who's going to be on the selection committee, have selected, who will be on the selection committee to review those RFPs? Maybe, I don't-
So the RFPs, the way the board has done this in the past, and I think that that's actually something that when we get closer to that, my goal would really be that we bring this back for full approval at the March 6th meeting, and then the RFP could go out shortly thereafter. I think that when you say we would have things done, I think we would have the work started by the end of this school year,
gotcha, okay.
not really a report back. I think this process will probably take between 9 and 12 months to get completely done. So I'm looking at having the work done sometime next school year, but updates throughout. When we talk about the approval of the RFP, the way the board has worked in the past is they've often had a subset, meaning 2 members of the board work on kind of a screening committee. So we would look at has each of the proposals met the minimum criteria, and then with this kind of RFP, it really could be full presentations to the board, and we could have kind of our top 2 or 3 come in and do full presentations to the board about what they would do for us.
Okay.
And for me, that would be my personal preference, but it's really a board decision, so I will defer to the board chair and
Okay.
for guidance on that one.
Usually, it depends on how many people respond to the RFP, but usually there's a screening process, and you get it down to maybe the top 3. And I'm sorry,
Yep.
I took a little mental trip into comments I was going to make. Maybe you just said that.
I said that.
And then the final 3 would be in front of us. And sometimes that's not at a regular board meeting, not even at a study session, but a special session that we would call.
Okay.
Because you would expect each of those presentations to be 15, 20, maybe even a half, maybe 30 minutes,
Okay. Gotcha.
as they talk about what maybe their initial viewpoints are, their background and history with similar projects and things like that.
Great. Yeah, no, it's
Response to the criteria.
very exciting.
Yeah, the little trip I took was remembering that I did listen to the board meeting when this was discussed, and I think the written material is great. I do recall during the written presentation that there would be an emphasis on the north side of the campus, and I just want to make sure that we as a board keep in mind that we want it to really encompass the entire campus, because there's some unfinished tasks that we've left on the south side that might need to be looked at as well. The Michigan Avenue facade of our campus. So, and that was the only comment that I had, that I would have offered that night had I been here.
And I'm in agreement with the plan, just basically because of that congestionedness of that high school. I've been on that for 10 years, thinking it would change. So I want to be there when that change takes place, because people accidents are just waiting to happen. We've just been 10 years lucky. So that, to me, is a priority, because you have to look at it and see the drop-off, and the parents trying to rush to work, drop kids, and get in front of the other one. So, I think that's a priority. It's a safety
I think
issue.
it's a factor of the fact that
Yeah.
our middle school and our high school are successful right now. We're attracting additional students, and so the student body has grown on the secondary campus over the last 5 to 10 years, and with that has come a traffic increase. So but it's time we prepare the campus for the next step forward. So, all right, any other? I think what the administration is asking for is the written document, if the written document is appropriate, because when it comes back to us in 2 weeks for, our further consideration, that it be prepared so that we can pass on it that night, so we can get the RFP out.
Yep.
So if you have any comments on the written document, please get them to the administration right away. Okay. Our next one is on student engagement advocate and mental health professionals. Sam?
Evening.
All right, so student engagement advocates was something that we started several. Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah. So student engagement advocates were something that we started several years ago when we began a proposal for a truant's alternative grant through ISB. And so we've been looking at ways to better support students in proactive and responsive ways. And so previously there were outreach workers that would really focus on attendance and truancy. And so one of the things that we wanted to do was think about how it is that we could be more responsive to keeping students in school, trying to figure out different approaches to engaging the family, making sure it is that we were able to make consistent efforts to engage families as well. And so what we looked at this year was how is it that we could bridge both the mental health professionals as well as those student engagement advocates together to provide a more comprehensive support system. So with us tonight we have Mr. James Warren, Ms. Chanel Caroma, and Mr. Devorian Ware, who are all student engagement advocates and clinical professionals within the district. You can pull up another chair for you. And so starting out, what we wanted to do was ensure that we had that we really wanted to be thoughtful in how it is that we move forward and thinking about a comprehensive approach to providing those supports for students who might be considered potential dropout or at risk. And I wanted to provide the opportunity for the folks who've been on the ground doing the work to shed some light on what observations they've made and kind of where it is that we see things moving forward in the future of how it is that we can best meet the needs of students and families.
So thank you all for your time. Just to give everybody some background on what we've actually been doing since November, we've had the following staff positioned at these different schools in Urbana School District, and what we've been doing is a combination of things. The biggest thing is just taking some time to observe. And so when we say observe, that could be everything from just going to classrooms, going to extracurricular activities, spending time in cafeteria, spending time having conversations with staff, with students. And so part of it is just trying to gather information about what the climate for students and staff at Urbana School District is like. The second part of what we've been doing is looking for ways that we as individuals can provide better support for the students in regards to looking for opportunities for us to have actual interactions with students, and again, specifically looking at it from an equity standpoint, looking at the students who are struggling. And are there things that we can do ourselves to assist those students? Are there things that we can do within the schools, making connections with staff to better support those students? So the presentation we're about to give you is an idea of the observations that we've made over the last couple months. We ask that you guys would receive them as observations. I think it's very easy to take these observations and begin to formulate conclusions from it. We're not doing that, and we would ask that for the time being that you all would really just see these as observations. Okay?
All right, so again, my name is Chanel Caroma, and this right here on the projection gives you an idea of and some observations that we've had together. So obviously we work at various schools, so each school looks very different. However, we do find some trends and behaviors, especially among first-year teachers. So here's an observation of a classroom. There is not a classroom in particular, but it's just an idea of how you can see a first-year teacher. So, for example, this is a first-year teacher, and she's a bit nervous. She doesn't know her student's name, and her students don't know each other's name. The teacher is interested in teaching, but her class is in chaos. She is unsure of how to handle it. The teacher feels unequipped, becomes easily agitated, and attempts to take control. So we pose the question, what do you think this teacher is likely to do in this situation? And particularly think about which students would be more likely to hide in her own fears and insecurities while being a new teacher.
I would like to reintroduce myself. My name is Devorian Ware. I'm actually going to talk to you guys about a different scenario than that one, something that we actually, when we go into classes, that we love to see. So we have a setup where there's a subject going on. There's a number of students groaning and complaining, I don't like this subject. And what the teacher does, she'll stop. She'll say, okay, who doesn't like this subject? And then, of course, everybody's hand goes up. So what she does is she stops and she talks about it. Why don't we like this? Why don't we think it's necessary? And then she has a conversation with the students, her class, to acknowledge their grief, their frustration, their issues, so she can kind of build that rapport to let them know, okay, I understand that you don't like this particular subject, but this is a necessity for you guys to be successful. And if you guys going to be successful, you're going to have to understand how to get over things that you dislike. And we see classes like this where it's right after lunch where students are riled up still. Some he say, she say stuff happen. And what some of them will do is, once again, stop the class, let's get in a circle. Let's talk about what happened at lunch. We're not naming names. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about, okay, so person A said this, person B did that. How do we solve these things? And that's one of the best things that you can do for the kids is you acknowledge their issues, regardless of their intensity.
And then we have another class observation. So this is a teacher who does a lot of activities in her classroom. And before she starts, she does, as Devorian stated, she checks in with all her students and say, how are you? And each student gets the time to say how they're doing at that time. And they also say their names because, as we saw in the last example, the teachers didn't know the student's name and the students don't know each other's name. And we do find that that does happen, because some teachers will go straight into teaching. But the social emotional part is very important. And so this teacher in particular, she does a warm-up activity where everyone gets to do an assignment. And then as they're doing the assignment, whoever gets it done first, they raise their hand up and they all get to run to the teacher and turn their assignment into the teacher. And the teacher will say, oh, try again. And whoever gets the first 3 people who get all their answers right get to help educate their peers. So then the other peers want to work with their own peers, which are the students. And so this is a classroom that we also look at highly in a way for kids to engage who may be easily bored in class or who may have a hard time being acknowledged for doing something good. Oh, and also, if you look at the bottom of the screen, we did provide pictures of students. These are not actual students, rather representations of students that we find in our schools. So as it relates to those pictures of those students, let me go back. We have Darren, and as you see, he has on a hat. We have Kanaya, and she has on some music. And we have Alex, who has his hand raised up in class. So for the first student, we're relating this to a class where this student may get in trouble. So Darren may get in trouble because he was out of his seat and had a hat on in class. The teacher gave him 2 warnings before he was sent to the principal's office. And as you hear this, I would like you to think, what would be an appropriate consequence for Darren wearing a hat in class and refusing to take it off? Okay, then we have our second student, Kanaya. She was removed for disruptive behavior. She was out of her seat dancing with music on. She was instantly removed from class without a warning. Again, think about, what do you think would be an appropriate discipline for her? And then our last student is Alex. He was removed for disrespecting his teacher. He had to go to the bathroom and his teacher said no. So he got upset and told his peers, called his teacher a bad name. And these are the types of referrals that we see for students in school for disruptive behavior, hoods, hat wearing, and being disrespectful to their teachers, and also tardies as well.
So the premise for this next section is to understand that there's probably some universal things when it comes to a student being in Urbana School District in regards to things that everybody would like to see happen, whether it's the student, whether it's the student's family, whether it's the teachers, the administrators, the deans, the support staff, everybody. There's probably a few things that everybody can agree on is that we want students who are, number one, being educated. We want students who are healthy, whether it's emotionally, socially, things like that. And so the idea is that all interventions, all systems that are put in place are designed to accomplish those things for every single student, okay? One of our observations, though, part of our observations is really taking a step back and looking at those systems that are put in place and asking ourselves, is that what's happening for every single student? And so when we look at equity and we see that there are students who are being misrepresented in regards to discipline, in regards to attendance issues, in regards to failing grades and stuff like that, we have to take a step back and say, okay, well, let's look at the system and ask, is it accomplishing what is being intended to accomplish? So this slide here represents the cycle of behavioral intervention. So at some point where a student is out of compliance with the expectations, that is considered a time for a behavioral intervention. What that results in a lot of times, though, is an educational lag. So if the idea is we want students to be educated and we're intervening in a way that's resulting in an interruption in education, and if that's happening for certain students more often than it is for others, that's something where we want to step back and say, hey, let's look at this from a different perspective. And so on this circle, it's not necessarily a circle where there's a definitive starting point. So really you can jump in at any point. And I'll start with the orange circle. So you have a student who either in the classroom or in the hallway has some type of behavior that he or she is redirected for, okay? And so in that exact moment, we have to ask ourselves those goals of that student being educated and that student being healthy, socially, emotionally, things like that. As soon as that intervention is there, we have to ask ourselves, is it resulting in an increased likelihood that those things are happening? And the reality is that there are times where it's not, okay? So that then can carry over into before the student even makes it to the classroom, there's some behavior that has happened that's resulted in them not being allowed to go to class, okay? And I think we all can agree that if that student isn't in class, then one thing that's probably not happening is that student probably isn't being educated, okay? So now class time is being missed. So again, interruption with the educational process. They may receive a disciplinary referral, and depending on what type of discipline is put in place, there may not always be an opportunity where if that student isn't in class, where he or she is still having an opportunity to receive the information that the other students would receive while they're in class, okay? And then that may, and really what happens is it continues to go on and on and on. And one thing I also want to point out is what may happen at times in this circle is some of these things actually happen in the classroom, okay? And so if this is happening in the classroom, if time is having to be spent addressing disciplinary issues, well, I can't address discipline and teach at the same time. So that student is not learning, and then the thing is not only is that student not learning, but think about the impact that that's having on the other students in that environment as well too. And so what ends up happening, the circle continues to go on and on and on. And again, the goal of that student being educated, the goal of that student being socially healthy, emotionally healthy, all those things, it's not being consistently accomplished in the current way that things are being executed.
So now we're going to give a voice to the students. Sometimes when the students end up in that cycle, they don't get the opportunity to advocate for themselves. And so that's a fortunate part of our jobs. We spend a lot of time with the students and we get to hear their grievances. So here are some consequences that are resulted from kids being out of class. So students begin to think that they're bad. And they tend to carry that in the way that they act throughout school. students begin to think that no one cares about me. They're usually having some type of emotional issue that's not being addressed adequately. Not all the times, but sometimes, depending on where the discipline referral is coming from. We have psychological consequences. Students begin to learn to either stop trying, or they learn to be aggressive verbally to their teachers or to their peers because they have this pent-up emotions and they don't know quite how to express themselves. And these are their ideas on actually being in school. They're upset about school. They don't know how to survive in the academic climate. And then they begin to think that I'm not smart. And I've heard students say that over and over again, that my teacher thinks I'm retarded. Their teacher has never said that I'm retarded, but the student feels that way. And then societal consequences. Students begin to think that this is an unfair world and that the odds are against them, that they're likely not going to graduate, that they're going to fail out of school. And this is where the whole truancy part comes in, where we're trying to target these students before they get to that point where they don't even want to come to school or don't even want to try. We also find that there's some students who spend a significant amount of time out of the classroom. Sometimes 2 days out of the week, there's some students who are not in the classroom. And this leads to, again, that educational lag, where they're not learning, so when they go back to class, they're not able to catch on quick enough because they've missed too many days of class. And then they tend to act out again because they don't understand, and they're upset, and they end up getting kicked out of class again. And then this is just to give a background regarding certain students. And these stories are inspired from students that we've met. And we have to remember that these are not only students, these are children. And they live in a home, and they have parents, and they exist in the community. And we get the opportunity, along with the counselors and social workers at the school, to really get to know the kids one-on-one. So for instance, we have Darren. He's very athletic. He plays soccer for fun, but his mom cannot afford to put him on the team. His family went without heat this winter, and he had to wear 2 coats in his home. Because of this, he's very resilient and resourceful. Now, Darren, he had gotten in trouble for wearing his hat in class, but what wasn't acknowledged is that Darren wears his hat not only as a social expression, but because he has Afro-textured hair, and his mom didn't have time to fix it because Afro-textured hair needs more maintenance. So he wore his hat because he was embarrassed to show his peers that his hair was messed up. However, he struggles in class. He's easily bored because he's very athletic. He doesn't like sitting still, and he feels picked on by his second-hour teacher. Then we have Kanaya. She was kicked out of class for dancing to music. She's very social. She enjoys having fun, and she often provides comfort to her friends. Kanaya is talkative, questioning, and animated, but she gets in trouble in her classes a lot because of her straightforwardness and how she speaks to her teachers. Kanaya feels misunderstood by her teachers when she asks questions. Kanaya's mother works 12 hours a day to provide for her and her sibling. And so when Kanaya comes home, she has to cook and clean and then study. But because her mom is not at home, she doesn't have someone to help her with her classwork, and so she tends to fall behind. And then we have Alex. He's from Guatemala, and he got kicked out of the classroom because he was upset at his teacher because he couldn't go to the bathroom. Alex has a hard time with English, and his mother actually has cancer. So he has a hard time concentrating in school, and because of his depression, he's easily triggered. When Alex is in class, he feels overlooked and disregarded. And this is because Alex is an ESL student, he doesn't have a ESL TA in his class. And so that he requires extra attention because he doesn't always understand what's happening in English. So he's to the point where he doesn't even want to try anymore in class because he feels like his cries haven't been heard when he's asking for help due to his lack of understanding.
I want to add one more narrative really quickly. One of the most fantastic and interesting things that I hear from students is the teacher that they get in trouble most with is typically their favorite teacher. And I always ask, so what happened? Why is this your favorite teacher, and how did y'all get in this situation? A lot of times they say, she's my favorite teacher because she's nice, because she's strict, because she usually talks to me. But this particular day, there was something going on, and I didn't get a chance to talk it out with somebody. My issue wasn't acknowledged, so I wasn't able to control myself. I didn't have a way to have an outlet. And when I work with these students, because they typically have work when they get sent out of class, sometimes they have work, I should say, they always think I don't know anything. And it's not that they don't know anything, because I'd be like, okay, so what's 1 + 1? And be like, 2. Like, okay, so you do know something. So what we do is I ask them, okay, so what's the question saying? And the first thing they say is, well, I'm not feeling well. And then we have to talk about exactly what their anxiety is when they're doing their work, because it's not the work that they misunderstand. It is something that's happening at home, something that's happening at school. And once we get past that particular anxiety, they zoom through it.
And then here's some cultural considerations regarding children of color in particular. So like Kanaya, who gets in trouble with her teacher, she tends to be very questioning. And so this gets her in trouble sometimes because there's the idea that your elders are to be respected because they are your elders. But for her, respect must be earned no matter the age. So there's different ideas on authority. And then we have Darren, who tends to be very athletic. He's restless. He has a hard time sitting down. And sometimes that's problematic for him in most of his classes because his teachers want him to sit down, which is very hard for him. And then we have people who, like Kanaya as well, or Alex, who may ask a question, why do we have to study Greece? Why is that important? And some teachers may find that a disrespectful question. They might find that question disrespectful. But for that student, they really want to know. It's not a sarcastic question. It's not passive aggressive. That's them really asking a question. So sometimes they are misunderstood.
So one big thing about the equity push that the district is trying to implement is that teachers have a learning curve too. So they don't always get the same understanding as other teachers. Some teachers get it instantly, can implement in their class, do social and emotional learning, but not all of us are from the same place. Just like our students, we are diverse, we are different, we understand differently. And what we need to start focusing on as well is what social emotional learning are we using for our teachers? How are we supporting our teachers? How are we giving them counsel? How are we helping them to understand what are the teams actually doing when they break into teams? Are we talking about, well, I'm having issues with this, how do I work it out, rather than bridging, okay, we're going to manage discipline rather than social emotional learning. And I think that causes a lot of confusion as far as rules and policies because they don't understand, okay, so one teacher will allow a kid to wear a hat, but I don't want hats in my class. I don't know why. It's a rule. The kid is probably going to get put out of class and miss learning, which is going to cause him to be disruptive, as we talked about. But this is a rule.
Okay, and so now, based on the observations that we've made and conversations that we've had with students and staff, here are some of the recommendations that we have. And when we say recommendations, we're saying these are things, some of these are things to be discussed, some of these are things to be explored further. So again, please don't interpret this as we're saying, hey, we figured it all out and take this and run with it. So some areas to continue to explore would be increased social and would be in areas in regards to the social emotional environment. So counseling and active coaching for teachers. So again, we're working with teachers who are able to acknowledge like, hey, I do struggle. And I think in that, teachers who will acknowledge like, and we want to make sure we clarify too, there's ebbs and flows in this. So it's not that the teacher has a bad day and every day is a bad day. It literally can be they have a bad hour, and even in that bad hour, there's good moments that happen. What we're trying to figure out is how do we duplicate that so that even in those ebbs and flows, we don't end up with these results where you have certain students who even in the midst of those ebbs and flows still end up on the outside in regards to, again, their grades, their behavior, their attendance, and things like that. So I just want to be clear that we're not saying that the teachers and the staff, that everything is just gloom and doom. So again, they have success, they have good moments, and they have that across a wide variety of students. What we want to do is figure out how to better equip them to have that happen more consistently so we don't end up with these situations where there's all these disparities. So again, looking for ways to provide better counseling and support directly for the teachers. So when a teacher has a rough moment with a student, what can we as the district, as the system, whether it's teacher to peer relationships amongst teachers, whether it's administrators and teachers, support staff and teachers, counselors and teachers, what can we do to better support those teachers so that they can more consistently have those good moments, but then also feel like they're supported to figure out how to effectively work through those bad moments so that we still end up with that ultimate result, which is what everybody wants, which is students who are educated and healthy. So continued racial equity training. Again, so far I have not, interacted with anyone who says, you know what, this equity thing, don't want it, don't need it. A lot of times what they're saying is like, yeah, I acknowledge that I need it, but I need some stuff to do. Give me something to do. Don't just tell me that, there's inequality. And a lot of the teachers and conversations I've had, teachers and staff, are able to say, hey, I recognize that, I contribute to some of these disproportionate numbers and stuff, but it's not like I'm waking up in the morning with the intention of doing that. So help me understand better how to stop doing that. The increase in diversity of staff, I think in that one, there's an assumption that when we say that people say, well, we just need, if you've got this percentage of students are students of color, then you need to have a matching percentage of students who are, of staff who are of that color too. And it's deeper than that. So nobody's saying that if you put X amount of, minority teachers or staff in there, that's going to fix the problem. That's not true. What it's acknowledging is that as we have diversity amongst staff, what that does is it brings diversity amongst understanding. It brings diversity among life experience. And in that, so it's not to say that people of different backgrounds can only relate to people of that same background. It's not saying that. It's just acknowledging that if we can bring more diversity to the table, then what we're doing is we're bringing in more perspectives. And one of the things that I've seen is that when you bring in those more perspectives, ultimately what you find is that there's actually a lot of stuff that is uniform across the board. So regardless of what I look like on the outside or what you look like on the outside, respect, patience, love, caring, those are things that everybody has the potential to bring to the table. And it's just when we have diversity, we get to get it from some different perspectives, which ultimately leads to a better result for the students that we're serving. So systems of support, so utilization of instructional coaches, teacher mentors, restorative services, counselors and social workers, and the strength-based approach. A lot of these are systems that are in place, but one of the recommendations that we have is continue to figure out ways to get those systems to work together better. So if I have a teacher who is struggling with a student, but then that same student in another classroom is doing well, how often do those two teachers get to have a discussion about that? If I have a social worker who is aware of some of the issues that are going on at home, and so when that student is in class wanting to have their hood on, and that teacher only sees it as, hey, they're breaking a rule, but then when that teacher finds out that, oh, well, what's really going on is, again, that student has some self-esteem issues and things like that, most of the time the reaction you get from the teacher is, well, if I would have known that, then I would have handled the situation differently. So it's that's another one of our recommendations is figuring out ways to get all the systems and supports that are in place to be able to better work together, again, with the goal of better serving our students. And then in regards to policy and procedures, like Mr. Ware said, there has to be better clarity. So if the rule is no cell phones, no hats, whatever, it can't be that in this classroom that's the rule and it gets enforced, and therefore as the student I say, okay, you know, I'm not going to do that here, but then in the next classroom it doesn't get enforced, I'm going to do that here, and I go to another classroom where it's a little bit up in the air, and now we have all this inconsistency. And then the final piece is equitable discipline, policy, and procedure. So if the rule is the rule, then it has to be the rule for everybody. It can't be that if one student is in class on his or her cell phone, they get a disciplinary referral, but then that another student in that same exact class, the situation gets handled differently. That can't be the case.
Did you want to add something? Because I will add something. Okay.
And then just to piggy off on what James said, we also have on here social emotional staff in the classes, and that's something we've been able to do. We've been able to go into classes and be able to see a kid that's crying, bawling, crying, and the teacher doesn't have time to go and talk to that student about what's going on. I'm so happy to be positioned in the classroom. I tell the teacher, hey, I got it. I pull the student out, and we have a one-to-one, and when she's feeling better, we go back to class. So we recognize that we do serve a population of children who do need extra support, and they do come from backgrounds where they're experiencing all sorts of trauma, and they really do need that time to just, they need to have a person, a safe person who they trust, who they can talk to, and that's available to do so. And that's something that we've been able to do by inserting ourselves in their classroom environment, as well as lunches and extracurricular activity and even their churches.
Okay. So I'm going to slightly reiterate because of the imperative nature of the social emotional learning part. I think we need to look at the school district, the schools, the classroom as a community. More than anything, there needs to be accountability for everybody, for everything that we do. There needs to be support. There needs to be active engagement in what they do, not just a checklist. Okay, I acknowledged your problem and I told you, you know, this is how you work it out. No, we need consistent support, consistent engagement in how not only our students are feeling, but how our parents are feeling. Because a lot of times we use students as mediators between the school and the parents. Or we use students as mediators between the school and the community. The school is supposed to be a part of the community. It's not supposed to be separate. We need to be actively engaged into whatever resources, whatever kind of events they have in the community, because the kids, they need to see a consistency in their community. They come to school and they don't see the same people in their community. They don't see people who have the same experience in their community. So there's a disconnect of communication, so they don't feel like they can involve themselves or build rapport with teachers, because you don't know what my life is like, because you don't live in my neighborhood. You've never experienced the things that I experienced. And I think that speaks, one, to experience of what the teachers understand, and two, somebody say that word for me. Necessity for the diversity in licensed staff, because sometimes a student simply needs to see what it's like for somebody like him or her to be in that type of position.
You folks ready for questions?
Yes.
Board members, any questions?
I just want to ask you, I think it's great what you're doing, but have you ever looked at this as far as families concerned? So you got Susie Brown in kindergarten acting up. You got Benny Brown in 5th grade. You got Julia and Judy in the middle school, Brown, and all of them are acting up. And then you bring them individually, and they say, well, my mom's getting beat up every night, so you got domestic violence. My dad is drinking, and so they don't get any sleep. But do you ever look at the family? Because I'm finding also then there's a track record with that particular family. And of course, we all know the social, the psycho, even their cognitive skills were disrupted from 0 to 5, because that was going on as, you know, the neurons were attaching. So do you look at that, and then a starting base, the kindergartners? Because from what I'm hearing, there's a concern about the 5 and the 6-year-olds. So they're going to be our future ones going into the other schools. So do you have a strategy that you're using with that? because I know there's been, I'm trying to think who did a study with kindergartners as far as their cognitive, emotional. It was a study done, I think, in 2012. I can't remember, but can you address that?
Sure. So, all of the student engagement advocates, we meet collaboratively once a week, and we all work at all the various schools. So we talk amongst each other about the students that we serve and the ones who are related. So then we're able to exchange information. It's like, oh, did you know this child has a sibling at Wiley? Like, oh, no, I didn't know that. And we're seeing similar behaviors. And then we come together with our strategies. How can we better serve this family? So we do that, and we do cross-reference, as well as visiting each other's schools as well, to maybe get some different perspective as to what may be going on.
And in addition to that, you know, again, right now we're still in some of the earlier stages where we are gathering information, and I think that's one of the common themes that we have all acknowledged, and even hearing from the staff at our different schools is, you know, of course, everyone recognizes the role that parents and caregivers and really the community as a whole. So it may not just be the parent or caregiver, it may be the next door neighbor, it may be the sibling, things like that. And so it's one of those things where everybody can acknowledge the importance of having that involvement. Part of what we're trying to figure out is how to increase that involvement. You know, I frequently hear from teachers who say, you know, hey, I'm reaching out to the parent to try to communicate to them what's going on, and the communication isn't coming back. And even in that, that's one of the things where we're trying to help people understand that. So, you know, if I call a parent, I don't get a call back, what does that mean? You know, the default thing that most people think is, oh, well, that parent doesn't care. And that's usually far from the truth. It's taking a step back and understanding that us as the service providers, if we're here to serve the students and serve their families, we've got to take a step back and look at what are we doing in regards to our attempts to engage the parents and the families, what's working, how can we duplicate that and be more consistent in that, but also what's not working, and if it's not working, we got to figure out a better way to do it.
Cool.
Other board members? Peggy?
Yeah, no, thank you. I wasn't even aware of this new approach that we're taking, but it makes a lot of sense. And I especially appreciate when you talked about, you know, your approach of gathering information through observing and having conversations just to sort of, you know, assess what the climate is like. So I have a couple specific questions, a couple just sort of general questions, because I'm still sort of kind of just trying to understand this approach that we're taking. One is, you know, have teachers and staff and administrators been open to your presence, I guess, you know, since, you know, you said you started this in November. Has that, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but have they been, you know, open to your role as observers and having conversations and, you know?
I'll speak from my experience at the high school. I can say from the very beginning, the administration has been very open. I think one of the things that naturally happens, though, is anytime a new person shows up,
Yeah.
you know, people start talking, there's assumptions that we made, not just among staff, but even among students. And that's one of the things that really in this observation period, I'm trying to be mindful of. It's like, hey, I know what I'm here for, and I can communicate to you that this is what I'm here for, but I still have to build that rapport to where you believe that what I say I'm here for is actually what I'm here for. It's interesting how quickly, it's almost like the telephone game, right? You know, where one person says something, then somebody else says something.
Yeah, right.
And really, I think that's been a very healthy part of this process too, because I think it sheds light on the role that professionals, whether it's teachers, administrators, you know, support staff, everything, has just by being in those positions on themselves. You know, again, we can come to the table with good intentions, but we have to be mindful of how individuals' past experiences factor into things. I'll give you a specific example. Had a conversation with a teacher who, when I first went in to observe their class, I thought it was a pretty negative interaction in regards to some of the things that were said to me, some of the questions that were asked of me, and things like that. And that probably happened about well over a month ago. And it was just this past week that teacher had a time to pull me aside and say, hey, wanted to tell you, you know, what was going on that day. And what that teacher explained is that the classroom that I was observing, every student in that class was of Latino background. It was specifically a class for a very specific, you know, group of students to accomplish a very specific thing. And so what that teacher explained to me is that by me being in there, a lot of the students were nervous and came to that teacher asking if I was somebody from immigration.
Oh.
And so those are things that I think we have to be mindful
Sure.
of as we're doing this, is that, you know,
Mm.
we know what we're trying to accomplish,
Mhm.
and I think even staff and students can have an idea of what we're trying to accomplish,
Mhm.
but whether or not people are receptive or not, you know, I still think it's a little too early for us to make, you know, real
Mhm.
judgment, at least from my perspective and what I've
Mhm.
seen,
Mhm.
really make judgments on whether or not people have been receptive or not.
Sure.
Want to talk about your
It-
experiences?
Yeah,
Go for it.
So I agree with James. When I first started, people are trying to figure out who am I. The position looks different than it did in the past. But as I focus my efforts on those children who really need that additional support, the teachers love to see me. They love to see me. They wish there was a me in every team, because they know that they need that additional support. So for the teachers I have been able to build a relationship with, or vice versa, build a relationship with the student, and the teacher is like, if I talk to that student, she's going to cuss me out. But if you talk to the student, you know, because I have a relationship with her that's not tainted by anything, because I'm just a person who cares. I don't write her a referral, and, you know, I don't, you know, punish her. So she listens to me. So sometimes I just walk the hallway and the teacher's like, hey, can you come here and help with? Sure.
Yeah.
And I just go, you know, grab her around the arm and say, hey, let's go, you know.
Yeah.
So I've had positive experiences, ones showing that what we're doing is effective.
Yeah. I guess kind of related to that, I especially appreciated the comments you made about, you know, you made them in several ways, how, you know, teachers are humans too, and they have their ups and downs, and first-year teachers, you know, of course, struggle with being nervous and frustrated because you're new and, you know, things are chaotic and you wish things looked better and all that kind of thing. Is one of your goals or goals of this program is to sort of help teachers connect with one another when you see someone who maybe is really effective with a particular situation or child, and to kind of help them connect with a peer who maybe who is struggling with that same kind of situation? I mean, is that one of the outcomes of your approach?
Absolutely. And I can say at the high school, that was a specific, and I'm still learning all the different terms, but the PBIS,
Yeah.
you know, that's one of the goals of that system in general. And so the administration at the high school has specifically asked me to do that. So it's like, hey, when you see that there's a teacher or a staff person who does something really well, and you see another teacher or staff person who acknowledges that, hey, I may not be as good in that area, asking for permission for both sides to say, hey, well, you know, if you feel like there's room for you to grow in this area, and one of the cool things is having the opportunity to make those connections for specific students, because I may speak with a teacher who, you know, says like, hey, I'm struggling with this student, you know, and certain behaviors in this classroom. Well, for a variety of different reasons, that may be the only thing that that teacher knows about that student. And so to then observe that student in that classroom and see like, yeah, you know, this isn't going very well, but then to be able to observe that student in a completely different classroom and see that the very thing that one teacher is concerned about, that student does very well on that thing in this other environment. And then when you begin to share that information among the teachers, you have one teacher who's like, well, I could never imagine that student having that issue. And then you have the other teacher saying, you know, I can never imagine that student doing so well.
Yeah.
And then you say, hey, you guys might want to, you know, link
talk.
up, and that provides an opportunity for them to share some thoughts on, well, hey, try this, or this is what works for me.
Yeah, because that seems just really valuable, you know, to
Yes.
be able to, cross-fertilize in that way, you know. Because, you know, teaching is kind of a quiet, solitary activity in many ways. You know, you're in your classroom alone, and, you know, you might have people supporting you, but pretty much you're kind of figuring it out, you know, so thank you.
This has been very enlightening. Thank you. And I hope this is another one of the instances where Urbana is trying to lead the way a little bit here, because this sounds pretty innovative to me. And maybe those of you that are used to this, it's not so new, but I really am looking forward to a lot of success out of this. And it looks like we've got the right team put together to make it happen.
Yeah,
So, thank you. You guys are really great tonight.
Thank you.
thank you.
Our next two reports will be delivered by Matt Stark. First is our
Yeah, I'll help you on, which one are you doing first?
resource officer update is, sorry, I was just reading the,
No, that's fine.
so for the folks at home, our third report tonight, administrative report, is on our resource officer update, RSO.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So first, before we begin, great job by our group that went before us on talking about relationships in Urbana schools. I think it's an opportunity to also talk about the school resource officer program. In this being my 5th year here at Urbana Schools as principal at high school, and I really enjoy how our SRO program works. And so we're going to kind of just go through some of the background of that, of history, objectives, data, and then alignment of values and vision of how the SRO program works here. I know that SRO programs both locally and nationally have gotten lots of attention about, you know, police in school and what that looks like and things. And so I think it's, and given recent circumstances and in national events, and including tonight, I think it's important to kind of go through how we view this program. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we're doing this tonight is not just because we're kind of focused on the high school with all of our presentations, and actually the one before was K-12 in terms of the reach of the student engagement advocates. But the school resource officer program has actually evolved over time as well. One of the things that we're going to do is I'm going to go through a little bit of the history because there are some significant differences between our school resource officer program and the one in Champaign Unit 4, and I'll highlight those just a little bit, in part because when we had the Champaign County Racial Justice Task Force report here a month or so ago, I think it's important to, they even drew out this distinction that they saw differences in the data that they were collecting about the two programs. So we'll talk about objectives, we'll talk a little bit about some of the data, and then we'll talk about how we work to align it and how we're going to work to align it as we move forward with really a focus on social emotional learning, restorative practices, and our racial equity work. So I'll go through some of the history since I was here. The School Resource Officer Program started in 1994 as a way to improve consistency of the Urbana Police Department's responses across the district, specifically at the middle school and high school. Prior to 1994, what would often happen is if there was a call out for any reason to one of the schools, a uniformed patrol officer would come. It may or may not be someone that had worked with youth before, and depending on who it was, what age group it was, what the infraction was that got the call out, you could have very different outcomes and different results. And so the school district and the city and the Urbana Police Department worked together to kind of say, we need to bring this, we need to bring some consistency to this so that we have a better relationship among the police and the schools, and as the schools are a piece of the community, build that relationship between the youth and the police department. So that was kind of the background. It was really designed also to build on the success of the DARE program, which was a drug, I'm blanking on the initials for DARE. Someone who's younger than me, drug awareness and response something.
Education.
Education. Drug awareness and response education. We'll go with that. I was looking around. Officer Bain said that he was going to join us, and he probably got caught up with something else. But the DARE program had been in the elementary school since 1992, and so it was really a way to kind of extend what was being done. The program is funded by a special resolution from the city of Urbana that basically funds a part-time officer to work in the schools. And we have been, I would say, lucky, but also, I would say, blessed and fortunate to have a group of people who have come into the schools who have worked hard to make the school resource officer a part of the school community. And it started off with Troy Phillips, who was just there for a few years, Anthony Cobb, Officer Gamble, Officer Wynn. These are all people that I got to know as a teacher at Urbana Middle School, as people who came in, had lunch with the kids, did professional development for teachers, and worked with students in the classrooms. And I specifically could remember Officer Wynn several times coming and visiting my history class and talking about things like search and seizure and how the Fourth Amendment applied to students. And it was great to have someone co-teaching with me that could talk about things like the Miranda rights and where they came from and why they were important at the same time as I'm teaching U.S. history to 8th graders. Currently, our most recent, Officer McNaught, Officer Bain, and most recently, Officer Steinberg, have really worked hard to improve that integration. And I would say one of the things that we do in Urbana is almost all the time that they're in the schools, they're plain clothes. They oftentimes will be at games and events in plain clothes, or often wearing Urbana spirit wear, and they've become part of the school community, including Officer Bain, who I believe was a Central grad. And,
Yeah. I'm not sure he wore Urbana stuff during the Central game.
Well, we tried.
I think Anthony was a Central grad, too.
I think he was, yes. So the original objectives are very similar to what we currently have, and I think maybe we'll tag team these a little bit.
Sure. So one of the things that the resource officer does is also works with our driver's education program, and has been, talking about, giving them some education that there is, and hopefully within the next 6 months, and I hope to have it to be able to send it out to both district administration as well as the board members. There's actually a group of about three or four students right now working on a video of talking about a stop and how juveniles can conduct themselves during a stop that would make things go easier for them, or how they can complicate things and make things go more difficult for them, and with some question and answers that are part of that. 3 of our high school students have been very much involved in that, and along with the Urbana Police Department, I think that's been really helpful as part of that. The other thing that I think is also important is that the resource officer is actually, and I don't know how much this was in its original intent, but it's how it's evolved, is our students now seek out the officers, our resource officer, for questions that they have that have nothing to do with the school. So let's say and start the scenario piece to try and get more information, those kind of things. Or, somebody stole my bike on Saturday. What should I, what are the things that I should do, or those kind of things. And also, because the resource officer, and because this is a close partnership with the Urbana Police Department, as Urbana patrol officers or things as they've run into or been in situations where they've ended up with high school and middle school juveniles, they'll call the resource officer in the course of Matt Bain or Jeff Steinberg most recently, who may already have a relationship with the students, so that they can help mitigate the situation. And it may have nothing to do with the school at all, but it's something that happened out in the community as well. And I think that's an important side effect of having the resource officer and our kids getting to know them. And because they, we have kids that are high-fiving our resource officer. I mean, they're truly a part of our school community. So,
one of the big things that the program was designed to do was improve communication, so that if something was going on in the community, the school, and especially the principal and administration, would know prior to students arriving on, say, Monday or whatever day it happened to be, that, hey, there had been something in the community that happened over the weekend or last night that could filter into the schools. And that improved communication is probably still one of the best pieces of the program, in that if there's something going on in the community, something going on Facebook, something going on between students at a park, we find out about it and we can intervene before the students get into it at school, and either run a circle or put some interventions in place to maybe make sure that the students don't bring the conflict into the school environment. It's really a way to provide that sense that, hey, the school is a place for learning, and that we are a community that works together to ensure that.
One of the other things that they've also done is, because of the unfortunate circumstances between the Central and the Danville game that happened and was a lot of the media thing, and I know that you guys all got notified there's some games moved and things. We also, one of the things the resource officers do is also we review safety plans on a regular basis with our resource officer to see, you know, how can we best address this, trying to keep events safe, both, and also looking at, our drills within the scope of what we do. And because of that relationship, really talking through some of those things, the Urbana Police Department, not necessarily resource officer, but do a occasional door check of just come in without unannounced to see, at what point do they get stopped and at what point do those kind of things. And so when we've had those drills or situations, we use the resource officer to come up with maybe better ways that we could do those kind of things. And in the 5 years I've been here is, that's been instrumental in kind of changing and shifting some of our current resources to make them kind of more effective and saying, okay, what are some other things that we can do? At the game procedures, we've also done those kind of things. So,
some of the other pieces are to work together with school, law enforcement, and families to kind of counsel students to say, hey, this is a way to keep this from happening again. I would say that this is something that's evolved massively over the last 10 years as we've seen the growth of the Champaign-Urbana Community Coalition and the Youth Assessment Center that's sponsored by the Community Coalition, the Regional Planning Commission, the State's Attorney's Office, thank you. All of those things came together to put together the Youth Assessment Center, which has, I would say, changed a lot of the focus of how that counseling takes place, and it also changes some of the interaction that our students have with the police out in the community, not necessarily at school, because I would say over the last 10 years, we haven't had a huge number of arrests at school as a result of the school resource officer program. Those numbers are fairly small. They've gone down because we now have a youth assessment center, and so oftentimes a conflict that happens at school or an offense that happens at school can actually be handled as a referral to youth assessment center rather than arrest. And that way students and families are connected with supports in the community rather than be introduced to the juvenile justice system. So again, 1994, I think that goal was kind of forward thinking, and I'm really pleased to see the way that has transpired over time, not necessarily because of the work that we've done with our school resource officer program, but that the work that the entire community has embraced around interactions between the police and youth. It also, obviously, a big piece of this was enforcing the drug-free zones, which in the early 1990s is when the first laws were passed that made it so that schools were drug-free zones, gun-free zones, and drug-free zones included tobacco. And so you had your first, early 90s was when you had the transition from people smoking on school grounds to smoking off of school property altogether. And it also, one of the final goals was to arrange for what's called resistance training, which is the middle school version of DARE. And over the years, that's something that has actually faded away a little bit. The school resource officer program has not been involved as much in the kind of drug prevention work because a lot of that funding has faded away, and new programs have been put in place by schools and by social emotional education materials to deal with issues of drug use and that kind of thing. So that's there. I just say in 2007 we formalized a data sharing agreement that came in line with the School Records Act and the Federal Educational Rights Privacy Act, so that any and all information received by the school district from the police is kept strictly confidential and is not shared, and vice versa. This data sharing agreement has allowed us to share information about things like a police report that's been filed over the weekend. If it involves something that can take place at school, the police are allowed to share that with us, and we treat it as if it's a school record. And that means it's not shared with anyone else. It's not shared out of the capacity of us as school officials and how it relates to the school environment. And so that's a two-way agreement that has does have that. I'm sorry, I'm reading as I'm talking. No information shall be disclosed to any other party except as provided by written consent of the parent of the student. So that means that nothing can be provided to anyone from either side without that written consent of the parent of the student.
But I guess to also rest assured on the data sharing agreement, there needs to be reasons why. I mean, it's not just arbitrarily sharing information and just to be sharing information. If it doesn't involve one of our students, I mean, if there's not a police report out there that doesn't involve our kids or those kind of things, maybe we're talking about in general terms, but not just sharing that and vice versa. We're not just sharing things because I think, I know that some people get very nervous about data sharing agreements between police and school and things along those lines, and I would say it is pertinent to whatever the thing that we're working on. We've had incidents in our community that because of our resource office and because we had a heads up on it, the admin or deans or counselors or whoever, we pulled kids in right out of the gate to make sure that they were okay and where we were, and tried to, so that there have been a few occasions where there's been no issue at school, even though the two or three or four kids or whatever that are involved out in the community all are in the same school, and how do we prevent that whatever happened in the community bleeding over to us and into school. So I think having that data sharing agreement has been helpful in that way, but I want to kind of rest assured for you as a board, as well as for anybody's viewing, is that that's not just arbitrarily sharing information. It has to be very pertinent, and anytime we have questions, I know that there's been a number of occasions where I've talked to Dr. Owen or Dr. Bynum about talking about, hey, there's a request for this, what do you think, before we just openly do those kind of things. So that checks and balances is still very active in how we do those kind of things.
So moving forward, we're going to continue to align what we do with our SRO program and our work with Urbana Police to come in line with our restorative practices, assist building positive relationships among our student body and among the student body and law enforcement. And we truly believe, as you heard from our previous presentation very well, positive relationships are vital in assisting students to grow. And those are positive relationships not just with each other, but with the adults in their lives and with members of the community. Our SRO currently has participated in restorative circles. As Mr. Stark indicated, it's sought out by students in aiding the resolutions of conflicts in and out of school. And so we see this as a very positive program that is continuing to evolve as our understandings of issues of discipline and restorative practices evolves. So we did have a question from one of the board members as we sent this out about the number of arrests that have been made from our SRO not as a direct result, but how many arrests have been made at school during our SRO program. And we have data going back about 5 years for Urbana Middle School and Urbana High School. And so I'm just going to run through those for you real quickly. Basically, I'm not going to go through details on any of them because our numbers are so low that if I were to say, we had in this year one student arrested for X, it could almost be identifiable. So at Urbana High School, going back to the 14-15 year, we had a total of 5 arrests. In 15-16, we had a total of 6. In 16-17, we had a total of 3. And so far in 17-18, we've had a total of 2. Our data going back for the middle school, we went back to 15-16, couldn't find the data at 14-15 to align the two, but in 15-16, we had 4 arrests and 4 referrals to the Youth Assessment Center. And in 16-17, we had 5 arrests. 3 of them were from one particular incident that involved 4 or 5 students. And then in 17-18, we've had no arrests so far this year, but we've had 3 referrals to the Youth Assessment Center. So again, we view those as indicators of ways that this is being successful, is our numbers are low. We work really hard to ensure that our students don't see school as a pipeline into the juvenile justice system. And so we'll take any questions that you have.
I just want to say, I want to see a video of this Steinberg doing 5 with them. Because I've been hearing our kids are very intimidated of Urbana police officers. This thing with these police stops, these young men. So at the game, I observed the kids. Those police officers stood like this, had no connection with the kids, like robots, like they're in the military. And we're not engaging with these kids. This new Urbana police force that we have right now is not engaging with the kids. So if you would do a survey with the kids, especially the African American and the Latino, there is no engagement with these new officers. And I watched them. They didn't greet people, say hi, didn't smile, like they were mad at the word. I wanted to tell them they needed to come see me. But no, seriously.
No, I understand what you're saying.
You're making these statements and they're not. These kids, some of the boys were intimidated. I'm gonna go around
Okay.
this way because that officer is there. I heard all
Right.
of this.
And I will say is the officers that work our games are a lot of the night shift officers. We do not have some of our day shift officers I've not seen at the game. And I will say that our day shift officers have had different relationships just because they have worked with kids. But I certainly will take a survey on that. So I know that some of I know some of the officers that work night shift we have never seen at school at all. I mean, the only time we've seen them is to work the games and the way those games get scheduled and stuff like that. So for our games, I'm not disagreeing with you at all, Ms.
And I will also say that I saw Mr. Steinberg at that game. He was not in uniform, and he was interacting with kids and families and actually in the stands, which means you didn't see him. Right? Right. So we had hoped to have him come tonight, but he had a family engagement that he couldn't get out of. And so we'll make sure that we introduce him to the board at a future date.
And also, if I see you at an event or something, I'll make sure and he's there, I'll make sure you introduce him and stuff. Because you wouldn't know he's one of the officers because he's not in, I mean, at most he might wear a hat at sometimes at the games, but he almost is never in uniform.
And these other ones that were officers, like Deanne is a social worker now because she loved kids. Corey, all them, Gamble, they really engaged with the children. So I would give a plus to the ones prior to that. I don't know too much about this Tim McNaught. I heard some things about the kids saying making statements about him, but these other ones were really, really good.
And the Urbana Police has always done a good job when they have an opening for this position. They invite an administrator from Urbana High School to be part of the interview process.
You need a board member like me.
We'll keep that in mind.
Put that on there.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, is it okay?
Go ahead.
Good. I mean, I know you're both aware of the research, that has long said that police officers' presence at school is predictive of greater odds that students will be referred to law enforcement, even for minor offenses. I mean, that's been out there for quite a long time. And I'm also just mindful of the Champaign County Racial Justice Task Force's call to community districts to retire their SRO system entirely. And they acknowledge that our districts approach SRO systems quite differently, but nonetheless, they recommended retiring them, altogether. You know, we go to such lengths to create a positive school environment in Unit 116, you know, which I'm very proud, and and we all should be. And our work in restorative practices is evidence of that. I think the report that we heard from the student engagement specialist is a further report. I just can't help but wonder aloud if if the presence of a school resource officer, even in the positive way that we approach it, doesn't work at cross purposes for the kind of climate that we're trying to create. I mean, just that having a school resource officer, isn't that sort of going contrary to what we're trying to do and what we're trying to create among our, and so I guess I'm just asking for a rationale for continuing this relationship, but is it time just to disband it altogether? I mean, it sounds like we do so many things with partnerships with the community, we have other ways for students to, has it outlived its usefulness? I mean, do we have better use of our human resources? I know we're not financially paying for this, but it is a human resource. Is it time to disband it altogether?
I would say I would be cautious of that just because of and without having Matt Bain or Jeff Steinberg here, because I guess I would ask them from a standpoint of not so much in the school setting piece of this, but also in the community piece of this is what benefits have they seen within the scope of our community as a whole? Because I think as Jeff Steinberg and Matt Bain before him are two that I've worked most closely with in recent history is because of their knowledge of our kids and things along those lines, are able to move into a situation where our kids are involved in situations that aren't necessarily school-related situations and be able to assist with those situations without it turning into more of the legal entanglement that sometimes can. But I would want them to kind of speak to that issue. I think that's an issue, a side effect of the program to do it. I think it's also an approach to how we do those things. I think the arrests that you're seeing that are at school, I don't know that they're specific because of the SRO program. I know the stories of each one of those that are at the high school, and I will say is there's quite a bit of backstory on some of those, some of which you've also seen in front of you guys because of the same situation. So, I just see that I see some positives. So in the idea of disbanding the program, I think we need to take a hard look at what the benefit and what the downsides of those are. But I mean, I think it's certainly worth re-examining.
Yeah.
I would agree that it's worth re-examining. My fear would be that we would run into a situation that would be exacerbated by the situation that Board Member Rollins-Gay described as there's less connection between the youth and law enforcement. I do think that this is one area where there's a positive connection. But I do think that I think that your question is valid, Peggy. I really do. I think that it's something that we need to think about as we think about what this district looks like moving forward. When we talk about what is our vision for racial equity and restorative practices look like 5 years from now, and what does the school environment look like 5 years from now? Would it be necessary for a school resource officer? Would it, as you said, the very fact that it's law enforcement, is that an issue for the vision that we want to create? So I think that that's a very valid question, and I appreciate you raising it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm okay with you exploring that. I'll just weigh in that, having been here since the inception of the program, one of the things that maybe we talked about or you mentioned and kind of glossed over is that before there was a school resource officer and police had to be called to the school, it was an event and a big splash and created more disruption to the school than having a school resource officer on site who was able to defuse situations before. That's another reason why the arrest stats are so low, is because school resource officer has special training, special police training to defuse the situations before arrest is necessary. And I would say that it is supportive of what we're trying to do, not antithetical to what we're trying to do. I mean, our students need to become part of the community, and in terms of training them and teaching them how to be part of the community, we can't necessarily say that an important part of the community is off limits. It's
Yeah.
no different than having Fireman Phil come in and talk about how to be,
Right.
you know, a
Yeah.
great fireman and the rules and so forth that go into life saving and things like that. So I don't know. I would approach that with a great deal of caution.
I
Right.
appreciate that sentiment as well, and I will say I'm going to respectfully push back a little bit on the differences between our firefighters and our police officers simply in the role that I'm thinking in terms of the black community, not just in Urbana, but around the country, the role that has oftentimes been an antagonistic role between the black community and the police. And so I would be cautious about saying that the firefighting community is
Well,
seen in the exact same way.
Okay, I may have,
And- no, I'm-
may have
I'm
used a
just-
bad example.
Yeah.
But it is also important that there be an opportunity for positive interaction between our
And
law
that's-
enforcement
yeah, that was-
community and
Yeah.
the school community
That
as
was one of
opposed
the
to
things that I
negative.
think is a positive about the way we approach this, and I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing I would just want to add is, I guess I would, as you say, you know, you vision out 3, 4, 5 years where we sort of hope our approach to restorative practices is going. I guess I would hope that we don't need to rely on law enforcement to help de-escalate problems, because we will have built such a skill set among our staff, our students, our families, that we're able to do that. We don't need to call in that, you know, to kind of diffuse serious problems. I mean, that's where I kind of envision us going, and we no longer need to call in
And the culture.
law enforcement.
Yeah, and the culture has changed. The culture in '94, if you do your percentages of minorities, and the cultures of 2018, completely different. So I think with the first team, the presentation that they made, that's going to be effective. I think that right now with those police officers, I'm going along with Peggy. We really need to look at that.
Well, just for clarity's sake, is to say, as Peggy is, we do not, I can't think of a time specifically in the last 5 years that we've used either Matt Bain or Jeff Steinberg or Tim before that to diffuse a situation at the high school. I mean, we have not used them in the capacity as a police officer to come in and do that. That's something we hold very precious and very sacred to our positions in doing those kind of things, is to diffusing those kind of things. So I guess I want to make sure that we're
Okay.
clear on that. Is we don't have Jeff Steinberg coming in and trying to, you know, play the heavy on those kind of things. We take care of that in-house. So, I mean, there's been maybe one incident where I can think of where we've called law enforcement for additional assistance because to get some people to exit the building, but short of that, there's not been a position where we have used them in a student interaction where we've used them that I can recall at this point. So,
Okay.
I
Thanks for
want to be,
clearing that.
just for clarity's sake,
Yeah.
to do that.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Dare I ask? Any other?
All right, let's move on to the next report.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go for it.
Hello again. Back. Same hat, different presentation. The presentation is, as I understand it, is the board has asked, I think, in the past years about a continuous improvement, just an update on where we are on some of those things. And so this is, I'm going to kind of go through just as a review. I'm going to try and quickly go through this, not to try and rush through it, but if you have questions along the way, please feel free to stop me. We have two goals. First one is increase student learning academic performance across all demographic groups, measured by on-track status and graduation rates. Steps that we've taken this year is, one of the things we're looking at is student engagement. Student engagement is a key factor of staying on track. I think you had our first presentation was talking about how do we have teachers engaging students, and if a student is engaged, they're not getting in discipline trouble, they're starting to ask questions, those kinds of things. So we have walkthroughs that all the administrators, so every teacher each week for the first 3, September, October, November, was seen by each administrator. So I saw everybody in the high school over the course of that time. Mr. Corson saw everybody, Mr. Waller saw everybody, Ms. Aaron Ludwig. And we had, on those walkthroughs, those might be 5, 10 minutes, those may be a little longer, but teachers received immediate feedback. They're not evaluated from the standpoint they did not go on their evaluation form or their formal evaluation piece, but to just say, hey, here are things we saw. Here's some things we saw, immediate pieces on that. We continue to review that information. There's a great deal of information, and it was a walkthrough that we designed as a high school administrative team, and I would say is that we learned a lot from asking the questions that we asked and things along those lines. We went through classroom equity audits. One of the things that was brought up in the first presentation was about the racial equity piece and teachers asking for strategies like, okay, I know I struggle with this, what do I do? I think one of the things that we went through the first round in January between the half-day professional development, we talked about and kind of talked to the staff about different types of equity audits within that, and then between that and the last Monday of January, we had staff, some did tours, some did discipline surveys, some did AP, special ed surveys, a variety of different things. Then we kind of debriefed on that Monday, and so we're still at the beginning stages of that, but really starting to talk about taking a personal look. It's great to talk about equity. It's great to talk about the things of how we need to diversify, how we need to engage. It's another thing when you have to then own your own information, and once you own your own information, then we can kind of go from there. So we've done that throughout all the first semester, and we're just getting into the throes of the second semester, is a DF discussion. We had that both as curricular areas like math and science and social studies, but also across instructional groups. So freshman teachers, sophomore teachers, junior teachers, what are we seeing? Our students that are struggling D and F wise, what are we seeing from a curricular standpoint? What are we seeing from an instructional standpoint? And having and generating those discussions. Again, using the equity lens to say, what is it that we're doing? Are we doing culturally responsive teaching? Are we meeting kids where they are? What are some things that are confounding factors? I will tell you attendance is going to be a major confounding factor as to why kids struggle if they're not at school. That's also part of the engagement piece, because which came first, the kid not showing up to school, or was the kid showing up to school, was disengaged, and now doesn't come to school because he has no reason to come. So it's kind of taking a look at both of those things are some things we do. Supports we've taken, MEP is continued, is a program that we've had for a number of years within the district. Clint Campbell, who used to be my assistant, is now in charge of that program. Travis Corse, who's the new associate principal, goes over the MEP program to what are we doing to specifically help our minority students excel, what supports need to be in place, what do they need to do for additional supports. Cece's done a good job of that. 21st Century, before Aaron Ludwig was an assistant principal, she was a dean, and when Aaron Ludwig and Mark Slotke kind of took over that program, we started to increase the academic support piece, and now there is both study tables for athletes as well as tutoring programs that are intensive. We also have Lori Ellinger, who's through the Mentoring One-to-One program, who also does the tutoring programs. So we're trying to connect kids as much as we can with tutoring programs. 21st Century, because of that grant, allows us to pay teachers to be up in the library after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays to get additional help, whether, kind of fun to be able to go up for math help from, say, Dave Dutton as an example, and Dave Dutton then is helping you in math because Dave Dutton's one of our math teachers. So that some of that has been a great. We've talked about, and I'm sure at some later date there will be a presentation to the board about competency-based learning and how we show that we have information. Dr. Bynum has really been instrumental in meeting with the high school staff and talking about competency-based instruction and things. We have taken that and established some credit recovery periods, so freshmen who are not on track have the opportunity to recover credits while they're still in their freshman year. Seniors who are in danger of not walking across that stage in May have a credit recovery program that is now embedded. We have a couple periods that are embedded in that so that we can do credit recovery while they're still in school for courses they may not, and it's not restricted from the standpoint of they can only earn one credit during one semester. As they progress through programs, they can earn multiples based on the credit recovery system that we're working through. So those are a couple things. You heard tonight from James Warren, who's been working very extensively with the high school. He has also been working through our DRA program, Dean's Restricted Environment or In-School Suspension Program, talking with our kids within the scope of their, creating lists out of that to connect with those students and connecting those students to additional resources, starting to ask their story, their background, what's going on. So because of just sheer geography of where his office is located and where DRA is located. That's been kind of a natural piece, and have really been impressed with his connection to try and figure out how better to work with kids and to help as they've gone in there for whatever reason is finding kind of that root cause, and so we're starting some of those things. We continue to do restorative practice. This year we've been, and we have not, it's been a slow go a little bit, but restorative practice not for discipline, which we've been doing and you've heard many times, but trying to think of restorative practice from the standpoint of, from an academic standpoint. You're not turning any work in, you're not doing the things you're supposed to do, you're not in trouble, you didn't act out, you weren't disruptive, you're just not doing. And why is that? And trying to get to root, again, I think the key element of restorative practice, I think is important to remember, is trying to get to root cause. Is not just looking at the symptom of what is happening, but what's going on with some of those root cause. And there has been some of that. That continues to be one that we're continuing to work on. The department chairs have been redoing academic policies, specifically like cheating policy, how are we doing weighted versus non-weighted, what other supports do they need or supplies to help support kids. I would say is Yvonne Smith and Deion Webster have been both, been nice to have them this year working with us to find out what other things that we need as far as support materials. As something as simple as, can we get this book in Spanish? Those kind of things that, it changes perspective. And again, we continually doing course curriculum reviews. We've had in our professional development, culturally responsive teaching. What does that mean? What are we looking at as far as literature books? It doesn't have to be, yes, there's still some classics, but there are also some great new authors out there and stuff that that really excite our kids from their perspective and things along those lines, so we're looking at those. We continue to review AP, and we're talking about right now as we start to get into the master schedule for the 18-19 school year, so it'll be here tomorrow, as far as I'm concerned, is what are we doing as support mechanisms for our AP program, specifically as we look at an equity lens, is the kid who is first, maybe he's trying one AP class, what are some other supports that we can put in place so within the scope of it of, a guided study support that is specifically AP driven. We're looking at that for next year. Dual credit, we continue to explore more opportunities with Parkland, the University of Illinois, and through a connection I have is we are also looking at Indiana University as a possibility, not for the 18-19 school year, but we're looking at ways to do more dual credit. If our students can, as we start to do competency-based instruction and do those kind of things and have more opportunities for our kids to earn dual credit. We are also, Travis Corson has talked with adult ed and the CNA program and continue to say, are there ways to maybe think differently about the adult education program and the high school, and is there ways to do a better job of bridging those kind of things? Maybe because of Dr. Byman's background and stuff, he has also helped encourage us to think of ways to bridge those kind of things, and why does it have to be all or one, or one or the other and not combination, so we're looking at that. David Charney, who is our auto CTE teacher that we have that is doing dual credit at Parkland, has worked, and I give him great credit. Our students, starting next year, our students who take Auto 1, 2, and 3 for us, which is a high school credit, if they go and enroll in the early college and career program, which we already have an agreement with Parkland for, and they take the Auto 4, Parkland will go back and look at those Autos 1, 2, and 3 and give credit for those classes. So it's not a dual credit program, but it is an articulation agreement because he's the one teaching that course, and he also assists and helps teach the course at Parkland. So again, expansion of programming, not just in AP and dual credit, but also looking at how we expand vocational offerings as well. Okay, so this is the page that I will just tell you is you're not supposed to do as a high school principal, I think, but I'm going to do because you know me. So what are we looking for? So we have a graduation rate that hovers around 84%. That's terrible. That means 16% of our kids didn't graduate. You're not supposed to say your graduation rate should be 100% because, that's not realistic. There'll be some kid. I don't know how not to tell you that it needs to be 100%. I mean, honestly, line up 300 of our seniors or 250 of our seniors and pick which ones that you think maybe they don't deserve to go. So it's continuously looking at what do we need to do to get our students to that graduation rate. If you come to freshman orientation in the very first day of school, I always challenge the class, be the historic class. I don't know, I know the records go back quite a ways. I don't know that there's any time that we've had 100% of our kids that started with us graduate with us, or graduated, or the 100% graduation rate. So just going for history, going to take a big swing at that. Difference in 4-year graduation rate, while the difference between white and black graduation rate is 2.4%, so 2% of whites graduate than African Americans graduate. If you go to the 5-year rate, it's actually 0.02%, so it's actually better if at the 5-year rate. I think the biggest thing is we look at racial equity and things, and we look at that, we want to eliminate that discrepancy. Okay, yes, but we need them all graduating. Even though we have, because I will just say is 84% is nothing to get excited about. You know, it's not I mean, in my opinion, it is terrible, 16%. You figure 10% represents about 20 kids, so you have somewhere in the neighborhood of, you know, 30 kids every year that aren't walking across that stage that should be, give or take. I mean, maybe depending on the size of class. So I would just say to you is while we look at difference of our students and different, as we break down demographics of white and black and Latino and multiracial and male and female and things, and we look at all those demographics, we need to see all those demographics looking very close to that 100%. It's not good enough to do any of them.
Can I clarify that
Please.
statistic just because we have the
Please.
News Gazette sitting in the back?
Thank you.
So, yes.
What he
So that 2.4% is actually the average over 5 years.
Correct.
So that's a great presentation at the conference I was at last week about the end of average. The person that wrote that book, outstanding presentation. So I shouldn't say the word average ever again. However, that 2.4 is an average over 5 years. If you go back 5 years, the gap was, actually go back 6 years, the gap was 7%. This past year, the last graduating class that you just saw back in State Farm Center was 0.2% difference. So that 2.4 is an average over 5 years because I don't want to hang our hat on the fact that we're at 0.2%.
Hey, and with due respect, I'm just going to say, and again, this is not the thing you're supposed to say in a public meeting, but I'll say it anyway, of 84% of the kids graduate. So it's still not, no, that's still not okay. So attendance rate, I'm just.
Matt, I'm going to interrupt you.
Please.
I'm so glad to hear us be straightforward about this because historically, if you look at our freshman class, it's always around 300, 320. And you look at our senior class, and it's always around 240, 220. And everybody says, well, that happens, that's not reflective of graduation rate. But yet, if you look over the last 20 years, I've been on the board now 30 years. So if you look over 30 years, you'll always consistently find that our freshman class is 20% higher than our senior class.
So-
the numbers have been very consistently
John,
like
it
that.
goes directly
And I know
after
part
that.
of that is people moving away and going to different schools, but yet I'm so glad to hear that you're straightforward about
Okay,
the
but I will
graduation.
also say to you is one of the things when I talked about the credit recovery things that we're adding, and I talked about seniors and getting them in line to be able to walk across that stage in May, the other group the first group I mentioned was freshmen stay on track. If you want to know what graduation rate is going to look like, look at freshman year success rate. If a high school student, Urbana High School, any high school, if you want to look at where their success rate is in graduation, you look at how well they do in their freshman year. If a student does not, if we have that retaining, we don't have retention anywhere else in the district except till you get to high school, and then you have to have so many credits before, and the state even publishes the number of freshmen on track rate. I mean, that is the key element. And it is no shocker that our freshman on track rate and our graduation rate are pretty close. So it's going after the freshmen and saying, okay, how do we do this? It's why we have block English. It's why we're looking at, as we did block algebra. It's why we're looking at things within 8th grade. We're talking about, we have department chairs at the high school meeting with math teachers at the department chairs of math teachers, meeting with math teachers at the middle school to talk about how do we do those kind of things. It's why, again, when Dr. Bynes bringing up things about a variety of things that we're taking a look at, it's starting to look at things from a holistic standpoint is we need freshman year to be successful. If you are successful, for the viewing audience out there, if you want to help your children, if you want to lock your kids into the likelihood that they'll graduate, freshman year is the most key year for that success of the likelihood that they'll graduate. If they are not successful in freshman year, it becomes an uphill battle. It just does. And I'm going to say is, that's why we put the resources. Janice Mitchell's program at the Urbana Neighborhood Connection Center is huge on the tutoring and stuff that they do. She goes after them hard and those kind of things. So I will just say is, I know that we're getting a little off topic, continuous improvement, but that is the key element is freshman year and how we do those kind of things. It's why we're looking at DNF list and why we look at those pieces. So.
And I know a piece of it is that many kids graduate in an alternative manner. They don't cross the stage as high school students that attend Urbana High School. They might attend adult ed, they might have different ways that they achieve that high school diploma. And so I don't want us to lose track of the fact that I sounded like I was real callous about
No.
past administrators reporting a 95, 96% graduation rate when the numbers didn't look like it to me. But they might have been looking at all the different ways that our children managed to get that high school diploma. And I thought that was what you were getting at when you said the 5 years. But you meant over 5. Like the university doesn't use a 4-year graduation rate. They say people that graduated within 5 years.
The state of Illinois looks at and publishes a report on our 4-year graduation rate, our 5-year graduation rate, and our 6-year graduation rate.
And so 5 years, does that mean that they've gone to like Urbana Adult Ed and completed
it could mean absolutely that they stayed with us, that they spent their 5th year with us. So, you know, anything past 4, so if they were here at 4 and then an additional semester, that would still be in the 5th year is how they would consider it.
So do you have that same 84% figure for 5 and 6 years?
It's 89% for 5 year.
5 year, great. That's
Yes.
that's good.
The last one on talking about continuous improvement and specifically about the first goal about academics is attendance rate. It has hovered at 89%. We threw a car at it. I mean, quite literally, we gave a car away to try and get people to, you know, I mean, this has to do with engagement. This has to do with a variety of things. It's trying to think of how we do a better job of getting kids to school and those kind of things. We hover around 89%. We've been trying. The group that you saw at the beginning is, you know, doing home visits. I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of resources poured into trying to figure out how to get that. We're going to continue to go after it. I mean, you know, I talk in freshman orientation. I talk about if you come here every day and you're prepared you're physically here and you're mentally here, I promise you you'll get through your freshman year. But you have to come mentally and physically here every day, and we will get you through. If you don't come to school, we're not very good at helping you if you're not here. I mean, that is, bottom line is, and you know, maybe we need to get better at helping you when you're not here, but if you don't show up, it becomes really a challenge. So our second focus goal is student engagement and learning experience students across all demographic groups. Using restorative practice, staff interventions, student agencies, students will have skills and resources to achieve behavioral expectations conducive to academic success. You heard about some of this. Again, you're going to see some of these very same things. The walkthroughs, we're looking for student engagement, not just from an academic standpoint. Again, a student engaged is not, if a student is engaged in the material that's going on in class, they're not going to get into behavioral issues along those lines. That being said, there are other mitigating factors which I really appreciated in the first presentation of talking about there are other things, but we're looking for engagement. If we're not engaging kids, and free time is not a good word to have in class, is just, well, we're going to have open free study time. That's like, you know, that hurts me. Classroom equity audits, again, looking at things from a behavioral standpoint as well. Restorative practice continues. We talked about the academic side. Restorative practice, restorative circles continue to be used. Elaine has been in to help train some of our kids. We're trying to continue to expand that program. Again, talked about the lead clinician already, restorative practices. Reviewing cases for interventions and deciding next steps. How does some of the things we learn, then we, you know, as we have successes, I think it's important to, as we discover a success or something that works, how do we then replicate that so that we do it for more and more students to be able to do those kind of things. Professional development, talked about the racial equity thing. We're looking at the entire school improvement plan from an equity lens. Is looking at, as we look at our data, we're looking at things from a, you know, we want all learners to succeed, but we're also seeing that time and time again, African American students and Latino students are falling behind. How do we specifically go after that? Let's not just say we're going to help all students learn. That's going to be our global goal. Let's specifically say, what are we doing to help Latino students, Latina students, and black students to help them be successful that are not being successful? What other things do we need to put in place to be able to be helpful at that? and not shying away from the fact that there's within discipline even, there is, I've been in front of you a number of times, and that's this one is, over the past 4 years, discipline's declined every year. We've had lower discipline numbers every single year. And because that N number continues to decline, that's a great thing to hang our hat on, except the discrepancy is still there. The discrepancy is still there. If you're an African-American male, the likelihood that you're getting written up is a lot higher than if you are a white female. That is absolutely what our stats show. And it's going after that. It's not shying away from it. It's sitting here in front of the board as your principal and saying, we have to go after that. We have to say, what is it that we need to do to change that mark? You know, what should happen is, and I get asked this all the time about what's our goal in equity. Our goal in equity is, regardless of your race, regardless of your gender, when you walk in the door, your likelihood that you will be, pick your topic, is not determined by your race or your gender or those kind of things. That's not a determining factor in how this happens. We're not there. That's why we're doing racial equity. That's why we're going after it. That's why we continue to look at those stats, and we continue to look. It's great that the numbers go down. It really is. There's fewer and fewer kids that are getting excluded from school, but the discrepancy is still there. We have to take a swing at the discrepancy. Is to try and eliminate the disparities and exclude, and it's definitely trying to work to eliminate exclusionary practices. And we measure exclusionary practices in a couple different ways. We measure exclusionary practice from the standpoint of suspension, and that would be the great number to quote you, because suspension rates are down by about 67%, give or take. But exclusionary practices is still exclusionary if it's an in-school suspension, even though that they're there, but they're still not in class. It's still an exclusionary practice. It's not as bad as being out, but it is still not as good as being in class. So not shying away from those are things we need to do. So this is a report on where we are in 17, 18 and continuous improvement, but I get a rare opportunity to be in front of you, so I figured I'd take advantage. What we're looking at for next year, things we're looking at to continue our school improvement, because it is continuous school improvement. You've already heard me talk about competency-based courses, the expansion of dual credit. You're going to hear a presentation, and Mr. Corson will be mad at me for putting this, but he had a chance to review this and didn't take it out. There will be a presentation that's coming before you as a proposal that hasn't come to the central office even yet, so this is the first they're probably hearing it, so I may get in trouble later. We're going to have a proposal of removing class rank and getting rid of class rank. We have a lot of statistics that say, and a lot of information that says it's a bad idea, and it creates all kinds of things and all kinds of problems within the scope of class rank and things. And it is not in the preliminary thing, it is the 9th thing factored into when you get admitted to the university and things. So it doesn't mean we don't still track GPA, but we don't have kids doing crazy things like, well, I can't take this band class because it will impact my GPA in a negative way because I'm number 4 in my class, and if I have to take a weighted option because I can't do this, and so it deters kids from taking other kinds of classes that they want to take. But that's a presentation for another day. Review programs to connect school and family. I love the presentation that they gave, because one of the things they talked about is that the school is part of the community. We are not an isolated island. I think that is evident through the different things that the district also is very much adamant that we participate in, whether it's the Pride Fest or, I'm going to forget the park. What's the park by King? CU Days.
Jetty Roads.
Jetty Roads. I mean, we participate in those things. It's, you know, it's all of those things is trying to figure out ways to make our, not only the high school, but the schools in general, to be places where community as well as parents can gather to be able to do those kind of things, and trying to find outlets of ways to do that. And again, many of you seen me and know that you know, and I'll still another shout out to Janice Mitchell and to Lucia Maldonado. The Ivanhoe subdivision and also the Urbana Neighborhood Connections have been great to host me when I've come out, and Lucia is really patient with me as I'm trying really hard to learn more Spanish. So we're in the master schedule for the 18-19, and we're in review of that. Before questions, I'd like to thank not only our students, our staff, our families, our community, and you as a board. Together we are trying to do that thing that is a key component, and I know we do vision reviews and mission reviews and stuff, and I would just say if I'm on any of those and have any, I would lobby for student realizing their personal greatness. I think is one of the great pieces within our mission statement, whether they are a four-year college student, whether they're going to do the auto program or welding or skilled trades or CNA or whatever the case, whatever it is that they want to do, is trying to figure out ways to expand programming so that we help each and every one of our students find that next step for them. So
the most quoted part of our mission statement and the part of it that was student-written almost exclusively.
It's because they're really smart.
Yes, they are.
Yes, ma'am.
Questions for, yes.
You know, I'm questions tonight.
You go right ahead.
The advanced placement classes,
Mhm.
when you all look at that, I know my son had to take, because I was told advanced placement means you don't have to take this course because you've taken it. But it must be for Illinois schools, because I thought at Morehouse would not accept one of his math classes that was advanced placement. Then also, he took Spanish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They still made him take a Spanish class. That was not acceptable. So my thing is, I'm finding our kids, especially African American kids, are going south to go to school. So some way we need a committee to do some studies. And if they took a class at Parkland to try to be advanced, that would not transfer to the south. So I'm trying to get an understanding about that, because we have no problems with DeKalb, even Indiana. But in the south, they're having to do extra work. For Urbana, we're a good school, well credited, and it's just certain things they do not take. And I really fought with them about that Spanish, because my son was tired of Spanish. He had 8 years. And so it was really hard. I even came up to the school and talked with the counselor about it. So is there a way we can help these kids? Because a lot of these kids, since they went on that trip with Mr. Morrow and them, they love the southern schools.
They do.
So
They do.
Yeah.
I will tell you, so advanced placement is by the College Board, and so students, when they take the advanced placement test, 3, 4s, or 5s are generally the scoring. It is up to each individual university, and depending on the major field of study, depends on what they'll accept. As an example, if a student got a 5 on the AP US History course, and they're going into a science, it might count as their social studies elective or their liberal arts elective that they can take. But if they're going to be a history major, it may not count for one of the required classes. Individual universities get to make decisions on how they accept kind of things. I would say is to the part of the advantage in some respects to dual credit, depending on the university, but like University of Illinois, a dual credit in calculus is going to probably transfer very well to Morehouse or wherever. Is going to probably transfer. But again, an AP 5 on the calculus BC test, they may not accept, and again, it depends on major. If you're going to be a liberal arts major and they'll take it as one of their math credits, that's possible. If you're going to be a math major, they may not take it as one towards the degree. My son, who's at Butler University, did well on the AP chemistry exam, but he's going to be a chemistry major. They're not going to accept it as part of his chemistry coursework that he has to do. So I will just tell you is each individual university is going to make some of those things, and for not only for you, but also for anybody in the listening audience, as you start to consider those schools, is to have those discussions of what kinds of things that they will accept depending on the major that you're in. There is no, I think the question you're asking of what will that do for this university and those, as we have more kids go to certain schools, we get a better understanding of what things they'll accept. But that is very unique to each individual school. The dual credit that's at Parkland, as an example, may not always be accepted to a school down south or somewhere else, regardless of whether it was dual credit in high school or you took it as a Parkland class. University of Illinois has an articulation agreement with Parkland College, so their credits transfer because of that. So I will tell you the credit game that the universities play is also dependent on some of those things. More of the public universities, I will say, except AP and things along those lines, more of the private schools, has been my experience, it kind of runs the gamut on some of those things. So I will just tell you is the biggest thing that families can do, parents and families can do, is as they find out what school they're going to, is to have that conversation. And I would strongly encourage, again, we have a listening audience, is if you have a junior and you have an idea where they're going to go, is start having those conversations. And if you don't know what questions to ask, come in, talk to our counselors. And if they can't answer it, come talk to me, and I'll tell you some of the questions to start asking the university of, hey, my student is taking these classes, what do you accept as transfer? So,
Okay.
sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions?
Other questions for Matt? Thank you. A spirited presentation. Well, believe it or not, this is not a study session. This is it's 9:35, and we're approaching our action items. So we have no communications, no policy review, but we have a consent agenda. Consists of the minutes of January 16th, 2018 business meeting, the February 7th, 2018 study session. We have February bills and checks, education fund bills in the amount of $1,041,000. Operations and maintenance fund bills in the amount of $212,000. Bond and interest in the amount of $1,400. Transportation fund bills in the amount of $251,000. Working cash bonds in the amount of $671,000. Amount of $27,000. Payroll in the amount of $3.9 million. And adult education in the amount of $106,000. We have a couple of interfund loans this evening as well, which it's the time of year when we begin to do this, as we anticipate tax receipts in June. So from working cash fund to operations and maintenance fund in the amount of $700,000, from working cash to transportation fund in the amount of $250,000, and working cash funds to tort in the amount of $30,000. We do have various personnel items, and I know we have one retirement that we wanted to just simply mention specifically.
Yes, I wanted to point out that under retirements, you see Arlene Anderson, the Interim Director of Adult Education. We've had her in front of the board a couple times here. When she retires at the end of this year, she will have been with us for almost 24 years. So we'll certainly miss Arlene.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Are there any wishes to eliminate anything from the consent agenda?
There is a correction on the January 16th minutes. It's stated that Vice President Dennett called me in order to reflect the
So there's a typo on the 16th that will be fixed. All right. That the vice president was in charge of the meeting as opposed to the president. All right. Seeing no requests for anything to be eliminated, a motion to approve the consent agenda would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Member Carter?
Yes.
Member Hall?
Yes.
Member Patton?
Yes.
Member Pulaski?
Yes.
Member Fisher votes yes. Vice President Rollins
Yes.
Gay, and President Demmett.
Yes. We do have a few individual action items this evening, 4 in particular. The first of these is gifts. Marilyn King from Delaware, Ohio, donated $100 to Yankee Ridge Elementary to support science education. And the following donated to the Michael Pollock History Scholarship Fund, Marty Milton and Carol Elliott, Susan Keller, and Don Owen for a total amount of $275, not $1,000. We wish. And the following donated to the Urbana School District Bilingual Program, Chipotle, Mexican Grill, and Judith Pecci. Totaling $413.63. Is there a motion to receive the gifts and send thank you notes? Moved?
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion's carried. Our first resolution tonight, 12.02, is abating a portion of the taxes heretofore levied for the 2017 to pay debt service on the general obligation refunding school bonds, Series 2002. This is the $1 million a year that we have been abating from sales tax revenue against our property tax debt, and this is the payoff. This is the final year we have to do this, and these 2002 bonds will be fully retired after this. We will be out of debt for general obligation type property tax bond services, bonding. At the end of this, a motion to approve this resolution would be in order.
So moved.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. These require roll calls.
Member Carter?
Yes.
Member Hall?
Yes.
Member Patton?
Yes.
Member Pulaski?
Yes.
Member Fisher votes yes. Vice President Rollins Gay?
Yes.
President Demmett?
Yes. 12.03 is another resolution abating taxes, and this is where we sold bonds with the anticipation that they would be paid back by sales tax, but they're guaranteed under the property tax rules because of the sales tax rules, but we do have sufficient sales tax revenue to pay for them, so we can abate the property tax portion. Motion would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Did I describe them enough to be legal?
Yeah.
Okay.
All in favor?
I just wondered if I had to do the 2010 yada, yada, yada. All right, roll call.
Member Carter?
Yes.
Member Hall?
Yes.
Member Patton?
Yes.
Member Pulaski?
Yes.
Member Fisher votes yes. Vice President Rollins Gay
Yes.
and President Demmett.
Yes. And 12.04 is the same situation with the sales tax-backed bonds that we sold in 2011. So a motion would be in order.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Member Carter?
Yes.
Member Hall?
Yes.
Member Patton?
Yes.
Member Pulaski?
Yes.
Member Fisher votes yes. Vice President Rollins
Yes.
Gay and President Demmett.
Yes. We have no call for future special meetings, I don't believe. And so we're prepared for the superintendent's report.
Just a couple quick things. Huge shout out to all the staff who served as facilitators and presenters at our Winter Institute Day on the 16th. It was very successful, and there were a lot of sessions focused on the future of racial equity work in the district, and so very excited about that moving forward. The rest of my superintendent's report, I'm going to focus just on the excellence of our students. We had so many things going on in the past 5 days. I'm going to go through them as quickly as I can, and I apologize if I miss anybody. But 8th grade boys basketball team took second in state. It was an amazing season. They did an amazing job, and the state tournament was played at Urbana Middle School, and so it was great to have them at home. The last several games were just very exciting. They did not pull it off all the way, but a second place finish is still just absolutely superb. We're cheering them on. Also, we have, talking to state championships, Luke Luffman received his second in a row state championship in wrestling. He won for the 220 weight class division, and AJ Fox came in runner-up in his weight class division. So again, our wrestling program is outstanding. This year in sectionals, our boys swimming team took third overall in sectionals, and Ethan Chow is heading off to state. He took third, I believe, overall in his sectional, which is the 200-yard freestyle with a time of 1:56:34 for a 200-yard freestyle, which I can't even imagine bicycling that fast. Oh, Coach of the Year, too. That's right. Thank you. Coach of the Year for the boys swim team. So thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. And then last one, I think, is VHS, the girls a cappella group at Urbana High School, competed in a sectional competition up at DeKalb High School. They placed second to DeKalb High School, and DeKalb has gone to nationals for the last 2 years in a row and placed in nationals. Wow. That means that they get to go back and compete for a semifinal competition for the region on March 10th. And maybe after they get through with that, we might have them come and do a song or two for the board before a board meeting. And in addition to that, one of the members of the group, Anna Lubienski, won an honorary medal for arrangement. She does a lot of the arranging of their songs that they perform, and if you haven't seen them yet this year, they are at the top of their game. So we wish them luck on March 10th. I'm going to stop talking, and I will turn it over to board reports.
Board reports. I'm going to build on the pool situation. I went to it, and I just want to shout out to Joey Wright, a senior, did the announcing for the event and was professional throughout. The pool itself, this district needs to be very proud of the facility. I haven't seen the timing system work that effectively since it was installed. Somebody finally learned how to do it, I guess. But and the pool just worked well, and it was a large, obviously a large meet, lots and lots of teams there, and the facility performed the way we had hoped it would on a large meet like that. So I just want to kudos out to Matt, whoever made sure that this facility was ready that day. It was just, it worked extremely well. So that's my board report. Other board
And
reports?
I just want to say I had a wonderful time at NAPIT.
Oh.
your national African American parent involvement. I went to King School first, went to different classrooms. We got to interact with the kids, and we came back. We had fried chicken, was catered by Penny, and it was delicious. And I took pictures with Don's wife, and we just had a real good time, the teachers and the visitors. Then I had to leave there, go over to the middle school, and Prince, even your staff from the board office came. He did a marvelous motivational speech to those kids, and they really listened to him because he told about his life in Michigan. And he said, even though I got on this suit and tie, look where I came from. And so he was just real, and the kids engaged. They lined up to talk to him afterwards. It was just a real good Monday. So I want to thank Urbana Schools. Did a real good job, and it was really engaging for the students. And me too.
Any board member attend the play last weekend? I didn't get that in.
Yeah, the drama team did a great job with Blythe Spirit. Noel Coward play. It was really funny, and the kids did a great job. I went on Thursday, and it was a lot of fun.
Board reports.
I just want
Yeah.
to make an announcement for this Friday. The Urbana High School Orchestra is going to be having a thing called Binner, which is breakfast for dinner. It's on Friday at the UHS Cafeteria Commons area from 5 till 7. They're going to get entertainment, which we don't know what the lineup is, but it's going to feature probably some strings playing. And it'll be $5 for adult tickets, and I believe $3 for students, which they can either purchase from an orchestra student themselves, or it's $7 at the door if they pay at the door. But you can also track down Tamara Gingold if you know who she is, and you want to go. So I don't know about you guys, but breakfast for dinner is one of my favorite things at the weekend, so I'm very looking forward to it.
The board reports.
There's a dinner coming up for the Illinois Association of School Boards over in Champaign on March 1st.
All right, if that's it for board reports, we might be ready for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. We're adjourned.